I'm so thrilled that we're doing our first Facebook Live event for Child USA, and not surprisingly, we're starting with Statute of Limitations reform. This has been a movement that has been going on for a good 20 years, but this year is so busy that we thought that we would talk to you now because so many states are involved in statute of limitations reform and helping to find access to justice for child sex abuse victims. We have never had this kind of activity before. I'm Professor Marci Hamilton. I am here with my wonderful staff, and I'll be introducing them later in the proposal. So, questions. If you have questions, I will be happy to answer them if I have the answer. And you can do so, submit questions through the comments, or after Facebook Live is over, you can send us questions always at info@childusa.org. So, the reason that we are able to put so many resources towards statute of limitations issues and access to justice for the victims of child sex abuse and assault is because of the McElmail family. The Sean P. McElmail Statute of Limitations Research Institute is now a part of Child USA, and it's their generosity that has made it possible for us to make such an extraordinary difference in the world for victims. So, for most of you, you probably know, but let me just tell those who are coming at this fresh, what is an SOL? A statute of limitations is just a deadline. That's all it is. It's an artificial, arbitrary deadline. And we have statutes of limitations for contracts. We have statutes of limitations for property disputes. We don't have a statute of limitations for murder or for fraud. And the reasons we don't have them for those crimes is because it's too hard for the claim to be brought for the murder victim, for the fraud victim who doesn't know that they have been defrauded. And the same is true for child sex abuse victims. They are subject to trauma that makes it very, very difficult for them to come forward. And for each of the victims, what happens is that the trauma of the abuse affects them individually. Each victim is individually affected, often in different ways, but the result can be a myriad of problems, both psychological and physical, and they can last for the course of a person's lifetime. So the key here is twofold. How do we get justice and healing for the victims? That's one. And the other one is, how do we prevent child sex abuse in the future? And by reforming the statutes of limitations for child sex abuse, which have been so unfairly short for so long, we actually can make a big difference. We can improve the lot of the victims who exist, and we can prevent abuse into the future. So there are a few statistics that I'll start with at a very general level, and then we'll move to some more specifics that we have about statute of limitations reform this year and also how it operates. But right now, what you need to understand is there are two paths to justice for a child sex abuse victim. There's either criminal prosecution against the perpetrator and sometimes the institution, or there are civil lawsuits that are possible against the perpetrator and the institution. About a third of the victims of child sex abuse disclose during childhood, about a third never disclose, and the rest disclosed during adulthood. So what that tells you is that we know that the average age, according to the best science right now, for a victim of child sex abuse to come forward is 52. Now, in many states, the statute of limitations was 2 years past the event. Sexual assault of a 6-year-old, and that child would have had up until 8. And then as history moved on, they had until age 18 plus 2 years. We now see that even that is not long enough for the vast majority of the victims. And if we want to learn who the people are that are endangering our children, we have to empower the victims to be able to come forward. You know, today we have what we call the Me Too movement. And the Me Too movement has been, in many ways, good for women, sexual harassment claims. It's also been good for encouraging people to tell their stories. But what we have to do, we absolutely have to do, is that we must make it possible for the story not to be the end of it. They need justice, and they deserve justice, and we as a society have blocked them from justice. And so this movement to end the statute of limitations is really all about finding justice, but also fixing a wrong that we've done to these victims. So if you look at the graphic that's now up on the PowerPoint, this is a graphic that we have at childusa.org/law. If you go underneath the 50-state map, which has all 50 state statutes of limitations, but also the medical neglect statutes and also extreme religious liberty statutes, you scroll down, you'll see the delayed disclosure chart. This is very helpful if you're talking to lawmakers or policymakers and they really don't understand what's wrong with these people. Why don't they come forward? And the answer is they don't come forward because of the trauma. And because of the science of child traumatology, we now know that the average age is at 52 as opposed to 20 or 8 as it used to be. This year is a banner year. Last year, about 15 states considered statute of limitations reform. Hawaii passed an extension of their window, and I'll talk about windows in a minute. California passed a window, but the California governor vetoed it last year. So the only thing we got last year was an extension of something that was already in place in the state of Hawaii. And kudos to Hawaii. A 6-year window is pretty amazing, but that was it. This year we have 39 states that are considering either reviving expired civil statutes of limitations, extending or eliminating the civil statutes of limitations, or extending or eliminating the criminal statute of limitations. If you take all of that together, that is a huge uptick. And what people say to me is, what happened, right? What was the sudden change? Well, it wasn't sudden. It was the buildup and the accretion of this constant news about child sex abuse scandals. So it's far from being just the Catholic Church. They're about 4% of this problem. It's really about the Nassar survivors in USA Gymnastics. It's about the children that were in boarding schools and who were sexually abused by their teachers or their coaches. It's about soccer teams. It's about families. And when you have 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys being sexually abused, it's pervasive. Most of us did not understand that until recently. Now we have to do something really serious about it. So I'm pleased to say this year 39 states have stepped up, well over 20 of more than we had last year. And we already have extraordinary success, and it's only May of 2019. So here's the progress that we've made so far in 2019. 8 states and the District of Columbia have passed new SOL reform laws that have already been signed and are going into effect. Out of those, there are 4 states that have passed legislation that revives the expired civil statutes of limitations. So we have 2 groups of victims in the world. We have the victims from the past who were not only victims of their perpetrator and any institution involved, but they were also victims of a justice system that didn't take them seriously, that shut out their claims long before they were ready. So we have the victims from the past. We have the victims who are right now being sexually abused and into the future. We need 2 attacks in order to halt this, in order to create justice for all of the victims. For the victims from the past, the only thing we can do is to revive the civil statutes of limitations. California tried to revive both criminal and civil statutes of limitations. It's unconstitutional to revive the criminal statute of limitations. It's a violation of the ex post facto clause. But that's no barrier to reviving the civil statute of limitations. The ex post facto clause only applies to criminal claims. So, what do? We try to find a way for the victims from the past to pass what we call windows, or simply reviving their expired civil claims. 8 states have already looked into that. We have 4 states that have passed window legislation. The 4 states that have already passed, and it's already been signed and will go into effect this year, are New York, New Jersey, Montana, and Washington, D.C. New York was a 16-year effort. New Jersey was at least a 14-year effort. And Washington, D.C. and Montana were pleasant surprises. But why did they happen? Because the environment that's been created by the scandals and the public understanding has made this something that lawmakers will support now. There was a time 16 years ago in New York where the very first press conference that was called on this issue with me and our sponsor garnered no press at all. There was nobody there. Nobody was going to listen to this crazy idea of doing something for the victims from the past. That's now become the saner idea, and that's why we see so much activity now. 12 states have passed SOL reform bills generally, so 4 more are waiting to be signed into law. We had 39 states total this year so far. We've had to update it almost daily as states have lined up to do this. And at this point, the statistics at the bottom of this slide are the summary of what states have done cumulatively overall. So at this point, we have 12 states in the District of Columbia have revived expired civil statutes of limitations. We have 42 states with no criminal statute of limitations, at least for felonies, and we have 9 states with no civil statute of limitations. Those are gigantic achievements, but as you can see, until we have 50 states plus DC, we won't be done with making sure that all victims get the justice they deserve and they aren't left just telling their story and being left outside the courthouse. So this is the map of the United States right now. This remarkable map is just activity this year. And we are so fortunate to be able to have a staff here at Child USA that is far more sophisticated than I am on these issues and puts together these kinds of graphics. You can find this map on the Statute of Limitations landing page on the home page of childusa.org. So we certainly celebrated when New York passed. It had been 16 years. But to be honest, the reason I'm clapping there is because in the end, what happened is that the primary opponent to child sex abuse statute of limitations reform in the state of New York was Cardinal Dolan. And of course, Cardinal Dolan in the end supported the bill. And why would they support these bills? They support these bills in the end because the bishops in many of the states are setting up compensation funds. They are trying to reach settlements ahead of this kind of legislation. And what that tells you is that statute of limitations reform is inevitable. Even those who are most opposed are finally seeing that this is the way that we have to go if we're going to solve the problem. New York took an army, New Jersey took an army, and this is the army that worked on the New Jersey bill. Now, what's different in New Jersey is that the child sex abuse statute of limitations window, the revival window in New Jersey, is good for child sex abuse victims for 2 years. It will open on December 1st, and that's just amazing. And it's good for every victim, victims of families to victims of sports, victims in schools, public or private. But The truth is that it is also very innovative, because the window in New Jersey that has just been signed into law also revives claims for people who were sexually assaulted as adults. That is the new wave. So the child sex abuse statute of limitations movement has been going on now for a good 20 years. And what's happening is we're all seeing that rape victims who are raped as adults also struggle to come forward, also need justice. New Jersey is the first state to do this so that both child sex abuse victims and adult victims of sex assault are able to sue their perpetrators and sue the institutions that let it happen. So, the most important thing I think I can tell you today is that this legal reform is not just about victims. And it's not just about their families. And it's not just about the institutions. And it's not just about the perpetrators. It's really about the entire society. There is a common good that's created by SOL reform. And the common good is that everybody needs to know who are the hidden child predators amongst us, who are the grandparents, who are the teachers, who are the clergy members. We need to know that. Everybody needs to know that. But of course, most of all, parents need to know that. And that's one of the results and benefits of SOL reform. The second is that we have had a system with very, very short statutes of limitations. And what's happened is that the victims and their families and the government have had to bear the burden of the cost. And so what statute of limitations reform does is that it shifts the cost from the victim and their families to the ones who caused it. So when you are able as a victim to bring a lawsuit that might have expired earlier, and now you can revive that claim, you are, under the American system of justice, entitled to compensation from the ones who caused you the harm, the ones who caused you the damage. So instead of the taxpayers and instead of the individuals who are the victims bearing the cost, what American justice does with statute of limitations reform is it shifts the cost from you as the victim to the ones who caused it. It makes the ones who are at fault responsible. It's just fundamental fairness. And then the third thing that's needed by everybody is that without these lawsuits, we would not know the scope of sex abuse, and we also wouldn't know how much needs to be done. We do know now in many states that have already passed this legislation, and we need to learn more, because what SOL reform does is that it educates the public. So if you remember, in 2018, Attorney General Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania issued an extraordinary grand jury report. Pennsylvania is the only state to have investigated every single diocese in the state. And in August of 2018, when Attorney General Shapiro released that groundbreaking report, what we learned was that it wasn't yet over in the Catholic Church. The cover-up continued, that there continued to be danger to children. And that changed the world, because those people who thought, when the earlier reports came out, that somehow these institutions, these beloved institutions, would just fix it on their own, when they thought that, they now learned that no institution fixes this by themselves. You actually must spur institutions. You must force institutions and families to become responsible to protect their children from child sex abuse. So with these lawsuits and with the discovery these victims get, what we all benefit from is the knowledge. We learn, how did the cover-up occur? Who let it happen? Who were the leaders that we trusted that didn't do the right thing? And that includes United States Olympic Committee, USA Gymnastics, churches, synagogues. Honestly, just about every religion in the United States has some problems with this issue. And so it's that knowledge base that then is going to make it possible to prevent sex abuse in the future. And that is why this is needed for everybody. This isn't just a bill for the victims, even though so much of the burden of getting these bills passed ends up unfortunately falling on their shoulders. It's about everybody. Everybody benefits from SOL reform. So I like to show the Spotlight movie slide for two reasons. One is that I marked 2002, which is when the Boston Globe series on Spotlight came out, as the marker for statute of limitations becoming a problem. It was around that time that I started asking lawyers, when I was a First Amendment expert, and I was saying to all the trial attorneys, why can you only sue for this victim, but those three victims can't sue? And the answer was always statute of limitations. And as time went on, and as the Penn State scandal broke, and then as the boarding school scandals broke, when all of that started to add up, when Jehovah's Witnesses had a problem, when ultra-Orthodox Jews and Orthodox Jews had a problem, when the Baptists had a problem, it became clear that the single most offensive barrier for the victims was just this simple deadline. So I am starting the SOL reform movement date as 2002 historically, and we've been tracking it and have done a study back to 2002. So one of the things that needs to be done is we need to rank the states. We need to hold lawmakers accountable, the governors accountable. We need to hold Congress accountable. And the only way to do that is to rank the states, for each of them to say, this is where you fall in the spectrum. So on our website right now, if you go to the 2018 SOL study, which we're currently updating, you will find that we've ranked the states combining the civil and the criminal statutes of limitations. The best state in the country to date is Delaware. Delaware is the one state that had completely eliminated the criminal statute of limitations, and then completely eliminated the civil statute of limitations, and then for 2 years revived the expired civil statutes of limitations from 2007 to 2009. But Delaware is especially memorable because it was the Delaware legislation that brought to the public's awareness the fact that there was a pediatrician who had abused hundreds, 1,000 children. And so in the state of Delaware, we learned about Dr. Earl Bradley, a pediatrician who had set up a practice that was actually tailor-made to bring victims into the examination room alone with him and to have the loving parents not know what was happening. That is a lesson for every state. And right now we have a series, the latest wave in the scandals of child sex abuse are involving doctors. We have Dr. Archibald in the state of New York, who as an endocrinologist used his access to children to sexually abuse hundreds. We have doctors in the state of Pennsylvania we now know about, Dr. Bartow. We now have confirmation that Dr. Earl Bradley in Delaware was not the only one. And we now know that parents have to protect their children wherever they might be alone with another adult. And parents need to understand that children are vulnerable and they're most at risk when they're alone with an adult. And when does that happen? That happens when they are in a car on the way home from soccer practice alone with a coach. That happens when they're in a hotel room at an away tournament. That happens when they're in the confessional or when they are in a closed room at school. And so one of our biggest challenges here is using all the information we get out of this movement in order to educate parents that your children need to be protected from adults. And what Ken Lanning of the FBI told us and this was one of the most eye-opening moments of my career on this issue. He said, here's what you're looking for. If you're trying to figure out who the child predators are, they're the nice guys. They're the ones you want to spend time with your child alone. They're the ones who have taken down your defenses. We all need to understand that children are inherently vulnerable and need a loving adult, a caring adult to stand between that child and anybody that could potentially hurt them. In terms of the criminal statute of limitations rankings, there are states, 42 states so far, that have completely eliminated the criminal statute of limitation for some felonies, for rape, for indecent assault. But in many states, they have not yet gone the full limit of eliminating the criminal statute of limitations for both felonies and misdemeanors. Now, you may ask, why would we go that far? Why would we have that kind of expansive elimination of statutes of limitations for child sex abuse? And the answer is the way that trauma operates. It is simply a fact that a child who is touched over their clothing may, as an adult, have more severe damage and need more support than the child who is raped, because of the fact that trauma operates on the child as they are. The child who's been previously abused, the child in an unstable home. Those children are at high risk. And for them, even what in the past we would have said, oh, come on, get over it. That's no longer the way we have to look at it. We have to understand that even misdemeanor sex abuse can have lifetime effects on a child that are negative and that cost that person their livelihoods, their lives, but also that cost society. And so we only have a small handful of states that have yet done criminal elimination for all of the possible crimes involving child sex abuse. So we've got work to do on criminal statutes of limitations, even though 42 states have eliminated them for some felonies. On the civil statute of limitations side, again, the ideal is to eliminate it going forward. And we have Delaware and Minnesota have done that. We have not done that in other states to the same degree. And so on the civil statute of limitations rankings, Delaware and Minnesota are at the head of the line because they have both eliminated the civil statute of limitations and they have revived the expired civil statutes of limitations. The worst states continue to be Alabama and Mississippi, where this kind of legislation has barely ever been introduced, and it has become increasingly difficult in those states to even get this kind of conversation going. In those states, we still know that we have serious problems when we have a bill introduced that would criminalize a false report of a rape. So instead of extending justice to the victims, there are deep concerns about the perpetrator. The truth with respect to child sex abuse is that there are very few false claims. A child is much more likely to retract and recant something rather than to make it up. Children don't have a context. They don't have an experience, even if they've been on the internet. They don't understand what's happening to them. They especially don't understand it if it's an adult who loves them and who they love. They can't put it in context. And so they need the time to come forward. And as you can see, we have plenty of work to do, even with a lot of bills being introduced this year. So the states that are actually addressing the victims from the past, this slide is those states that have at some point revived or enacted a window that will revive expired civil statutes of limitations. The most recent are here, Montana, New Jersey, New York, and Washington, D.C. California was the leader in 2003. They had a one-year window. And the beauty of the California window in 2003 was that the sky didn't fall and we got statistics that we needed to understand how these windows operate. Despite the lobbying against the windows by the insurance industry, which I think is short-sighted and unfortunate, despite the lobbying by religious leaders, in 2003 in California, in a state that at the time had about 35 million residents, there were 1,150 claims. That's right, there were only a little over 1,000 claims. And so what we know for a fact is that the dam does not open, the courts are not overwhelmed, and those numbers are reflected in the later windows that are passed in other states. Now, in Delaware, a small state compared to California, we had even more claims, but that's because of Dr. Earl Bradley. And we calculated in Delaware about 1,175 claims, but just about 1,000 of those were the ones that involved Dr. Earl Bradley. So once again, the sky did not fall, but in fact, Delaware parents learned there was a pediatrician they should never use. They learned they need to protect their children even from beloved and trusted doctors. And they also learned that it's possible for the victims to have a voice and justice. We have a team and a growing team. At this point, our SOL reform team is now across two organizations. Child USA is a 501c3 think tank. We don't do direct service, we just study and analyze. We study the side of it from the social science, the side of it from the legal side of it, and then we put those together to make recommendations and pursue the best policies to protect children from all abuse and neglect. We have Alice Hannon is working with us. She's a former student of mine from Cardozo Law School. She is our part-time staff attorney on SOL issues exclusively. All of her time is dedicated, all the wonderful statistics on the site, all of the 2019 statistics. Thank you, Alice. Allie Boren is heading up our legal department, and she's working on testimony for each of the states that needs it, and also for helping to track these bills as we have so much going on. We're in the process of interviewing and hiring 2 legal fellows. We're hoping to hire individuals who have graduated from law school, either recently or maybe not so recently, to be fellows with our institution for at least a year, possibly 2 years, and to do legal research that's on the cutting edge of child protection. So we will be adding some more pictures here by the time we have our next Facebook Live event. But we've started a 501c4. 501c3s, Child USA is limited to advocating for specific legislation to 20% of our activity. And so we need, in addition to doing all of the studies and the data and the tracking and everything and setting out the white papers on these issues, we also need a 501c4. And the 501c4 nonprofits are the ones that are permitted to lobby and to engage in advocacy. And I am absolutely thrilled that Catherine Robb, a dear friend from the wars in New York for the Child Victims Act, has taken on the role of executive director. And so we now have a sister organization, Child US Advocacy. And Catherine Robb is the executive director. She's already been amazing and is working in state after state. And she will be the source for working on specific bills in specific states using all of the information that we have on our site and that we're building in the background as we continue to work on these issues. We are very excited to announce that tomorrow there will be an announcement, and it will be the Leadership Council joining forces with Child USA. The Leadership Council is a very distinguished group of social scientists, lawyers, and policy experts that has done amazing work pushing back against junk science in the field and working to get the facts out there so that we do a much better job of protecting children from abuse and neglect. We are thrilled that we are going to be able to incorporate Leadership Council in the sense that they will be an advisory committee to us, and their resources will go into all of the initiatives we work on. And we are really looking forward to working with Joanna Silberg, who has been the president of Leadership Council, and all of its distinguished and amazing members. So tomorrow, please note there'll be a press conference or a press alert, and we'll let you know. We will be having a series of Facebook Live events on each of our initiatives at some point over the course of the year. And just keep an eye out for a child marriage roundup, for work that we're doing on the abuse and neglect of athletes, including our independent commission studying the Nassar scandal, the Game Over Commission. We are looking at very closely work on how to increase vaccination rates for children from two fronts, both eliminating the religious exemptions and also making it harder for parents who aren't following the science to let their children down and not to vaccinate them. And we're also working very hard on family court reform. There are far too many children in the family court system who've been abused by a parent and who are being given to that parent, and that parent has gotten custody. That's something we're focusing on, and we will have an event for that in the future. So thanks very much. I hope you'll visit our website, and now I will answer some questions that we've gotten from my trusty helpers. So the first question is, will more states likely follow New Jersey's lead? I think it's hard for those states not to follow New Jersey's lead of providing a window of revival for both child victims and victims who were adults. The logic is just in our public consciousness now. So I expect to see this replicated in other states. But on the other hand, it is still a mano fight. It is still a battle to get these bills passed. The fact we have 39 bills introduced and the fact we have so much success so far this year is only because of the accumulation of work of many people over many years. So should that be the future? Yes, we hope it is the future. But it's going to take tremendous effort on the part of organizations working together, banding together, and helping each other make sure this happens. The second question is, how has the Me Too movement helped bring awareness to child sex abuse? So, the Me Too movement was really started, the phrase was started before it was even a hashtag, in the context of a child sex abuse issue. But when the Weinstein scandal hit and we had the October birth of the hashtag Me Too, in many ways the movement shifted and was no longer focusing on children and was really focusing on women. Women who are subjected to harassment through their employment, or women who are subjected to harassment at work from everyone around them, or because they were raped. So the Me Too movement now is synonymous in many ways with adults. And the child sex abuse issues in a lot of ways have dropped out. The large fund that was created early in the Me Too movement was solely for adults. But we support the Me Too movement's spirit. And the spirit is empowering victims of sex abuse, harassment, and assault. And the spirit needs to lead to legal reform. It is not enough for the many, many women and men who have been sexually abused or assaulted to be told, go tell your story, stand up in public, Talk about the things that are most humiliating or embarrassing and disempowering to you. And then go back home and get your act together. That's not enough. We must provide justice for these victims. We must give them openings. And so the Me Too movement will not bear fruit until we have justice for the child sex abuse victims and now the adult victims that are now coming into the same space. Let's see, the third question. Where can I find resources for the state I live in? So if you go to childusa.org/law and you go to the map, everything with Child USA is some version of blue. As you might have told, I really like blue. And so go to the blue map and click on your state, and it will come up with the civil statute of limitations, the criminal statute of limitations. It will tell you the age of marriage in your state, the age of consent. So there is a tremendous amount of information state by state. We update this on a regular basis. We'll have 7 interns this summer, both from the Fox Fellows program at Penn and also from many other schools, who will be working on updating and adding information. And let me just make a pitch now. If you know about statute of limitations bills in your state, if you know about injustice in your state, if you know about anything involving these issues that you think we're not covering, please contact us. And you can email us at info@childusa.org. Okay, 2 more questions, and then I will let you go to lunch. Can you bring civil and criminal claims at the same time? Theoretically, you can, but what usually happens, and what really should happen in most circumstances, is that if you are in statute for both criminal and civil, the criminal prosecution should go forward first, and the civil claims should be held back until that criminal prosecution is done. The last thing that we want to do is to get in the way of the prosecutors being able to build the case and to put a perpetrator in jail or to provide fines for an institution that's doing the wrong thing. So criminal first, civil second. The tragedy is that for the vast majority of victims in the United States right now, their criminal statute of limitations probably expired. And so their only option is a civil claim, and then the question is, does the state have a statute of limitations that fits their needs? And that's what we're all working on together. And then last but not least, we have someone asking about parental alienation. So parental alienation is a theory that has been popular in the family courts. It is very simplistic, and it is simply misleading in family court cases, and often leads to a family court judge thinking erroneously that a child can be safe with someone who the parent says is sexually abusing the child. What parental alienation means is it's a theory that says, let me give you an example. The mother is distraught. She has just found out that her child was sexually abused by her spouse. She is now desperate to get this child away from this perpetrator, her husband. And so what she does is, in hysterics, she goes into the courts and she says, you must protect my child. This man must no longer have any access to this child. Sadly, the lawyers for the husband will argue that she's just trying to alienate the father from the child, that she's just standing between them, that this is something selfish on her part, and therefore she is guilty of parental alienation. She needs to stop saying that her child is being sexually abused, even if the child is. She needs to be muffled, and then the court might even just give the custody to the father. Why? Because he's cool and calm, and the judge erroneously believes that the mother is not stable and that the father wouldn't ever do this. We need to do a better job of educating our family court judges. This is a crisis. It's a child sex abuse crisis in the United States. It's another issue we'll be working on. So I want to thank you so much for coming today. Are there any other questions, staff, team? I want to thank Sarah Williams for manning the camera and setting it up. I want to thank Jillian Ruck for this amazing PowerPoint. You can be certain I did not do it, nor did I set up the camera. And I want to thank our new Fox Fellow, Sarah Hahn-DuPont, who has just been amazing so far, and we look forward to being with her all summer. So have a great summer. Thanks a lot.